Thank you, Ellie. Hello, good afternoon and welcome to this Summer 2021 update. My name's Eva McManaman. I'm the Senior Qualification Manager for MFL. I'm not here alone. I've got two colleagues in the background who are going to help me with the Q&A. So that's Katie Lewis, the Head of English Languages and Drama, and Sharon Chudak, our Qualification Developer. So in terms of the Q&A and group chat, I know Ellie's just kind of mentioned them. If we can keep questions, specific questions to the Q&A, then they will get answered by Katie and Sharon. I won't be looking at the Q&A. And if we keep the group chat for just kind of expressions of thoughts, feelings, sharing of ideas, etc. And there'll be particular moments when I encourage you to use that. Again, with so many delegates at the event, I won't be able to monitor the group chat because sometimes it does spin past very quickly. But I do want to encourage you to make use of it so you can share with each other what's going on in your schools. Just to highlight, if any of you were at the event that I delivered on the 24th of March, which was right at the, well, not at the beginning of this process, but before anything had been released by Ofqual or by the exam boards, and I wanted to make sure that the MFL teachers had a bit of information about what was going to be coming your way. If you were at that event, you might think that some of the information you're receiving now is very similar, and you'll be right. But there is new information, and it doesn't mean that you might not have new questions because you obviously have digested things and moved a bit further on in your processes in terms of grading. And I will kind of focus on languages aspects later on in the event. These are slides that have been generated for all subjects to deliver. So there is kind of more general information in the first section, but I will be moving on to more language-specific information later in the event. And as we move through, I will invite Katie or Sharon to come on mic and just kind of summarise any of the key kind of questions which keeps coming up in the Q&A, so that you can all hear the answers to those. So here's the agenda, but I will move on because we haven't got that long. So just to say, there's a lot of information on these slides, but of course they will be shared with you. You'll be able to access them. The recording will be made available after the event. So just kind of keep that in mind if you don't feel like you've had a chance to kind of read everything, because there's a lot and it is quite small font. So I'm going to summarise what you need to understand from these. So of course the context is that the summer exams were cancelled and students are now going to receive grades awarded and determined by their teachers. They will only be assessed on what they have been taught. And of course this is the point of this, the point of cancelling exams is that it wasn't going to be fair for all students to sit the same exams when they haven't all had the same experience of teaching. With the various lockdowns, personal situations, it is not suitable that we have a national exam series, and I think we just kind of need to keep remembering this is why we're at this stage, and this is why the teachers are being given the chance to award grades, because they know, you know, what your students have learnt or been taught. You know what they can achieve. Okay, so you'll only be assessing on what they have been taught. No algorithm will be used, and you're able to draw on a range of evidence. So that could be optional use of the questions that we've provided, doing mock exams, coursework obviously not relevant for GCSE languages, or any other work that's been completed as part of the pupil's course. And we've provided lots of guidance for your teachers, and I'll be walking through all that guidance. And you'll have to submit those grades by the 18th of June, with results days for both GCE and GCSE in the same week on the 10th and 12th of August. So that's the very broad details. This timeline obviously shows a lot of dates which have now passed, but yeah, and as I said, I delivered an event on the 24th of March, when 2 days later the Jcq grade descriptors came out, and then proceeded each week. More and more information arrived on our website. We've got the grade descriptors that have been produced per language and with exemplification of that grading, which is absolutely fantastic, and I'll kind of refer to that later on. Just to emphasise, there's a window for the teacher assessed grade submission of the 26th of May to the 18th of June. Okay, so there will be, I know lots of people are asking about this, there will be a portal in which to submit the marks, and that goes the same for the speaking endorsement levels as well. That portal isn't open yet, and there will be support on how to use it. It'll be accessed through Edexcel online, I believe. But that's not open yet. So I know lots of people are asking where do we submit the marks. It's not available yet, not until the 26th of May. Okay. Also about the speaking endorsement, some people have been asking me about the centre declaration form. We've got a draft example of that under forms on our website, and that's a draft example because it was always going to be an electronic centre declaration with regards to the speaking endorsement, and again that will be submitted through the portal. Okay, so the Jcq Guidance. So this was released, as I mentioned, 2 days after my first event on Friday the 26th, and it is a very big document. We created had a link on our website and provided the top 10 important things to note. It's got lots of details about the processes for this summer. An editable centre policy, assessment record sheets, head of department checklist, grade descriptors. It is an extremely important document. So if you have not looked at it, you would need to make sure that you do. And my understanding is that we have a document which has all the links from this event all on one document, because there are a lot of links as we go through the event. Okay. And the Jcq Guidance also outlined a quality assurance process. Now, to many respects, this has already been completed at a senior level. The deadline, I think it was a couple of days ago, or was it in April, for the centres to submit their quality assurance process. That is now being reviewed externally. The exam boards are looking at the quality assurance processes that have been put in place, and make a decision whether they need to get in contact and ask more details, or or confirm details about the quality assurance process. And then there's the third stage, which will be about this very small writing, so I'll try and read it out to you. Targeted and random sampling by awarding organisations of centre policies and evidence underpinning submitted grades through virtual centre visits. So that's the idea of kind of what as a school have you decided will be the evidence that you will be using for most of your students, because it may be the case that for the majority of the cohorts doing the French GCSE, they will all be doing A, B and C exams, and that's what you're going to use. But there may be one student who, for whatever reason, they can't attend, they've had been isolating, etc., and therefore another piece of evidence will have to be used, and that's okay if it's not the same for every single student, but it's obviously the details of how that works needs to be in the quality assurance document. So there's April the 30th. So this has already been submitted. I think the important point to remember is that this is underpinning the determination of grades. There's an internal quality assurance and the external quality assurance. And I know there's concern about how can you make sure that X centre down the road is doing the same or applying the same. And again, we have to remember the whole point of why this has happened is because we could not have national exams. They could not happen. It wouldn't be fair. So this is about the awarding organisations ensuring that centres are applying the correct quality assurance for their centre. Okay, I'm going to move on. Guidance on grading. Now, the centre has to ensure that students have had the opportunity to show the full breadth of their knowledge and understanding based on what they have been taught. So they have to have had the opportunity. This kind of also applies for the speaking endorsement, the idea that every student must have had the opportunity to be able to do some speaking so that they can receive a speaking endorsement. And the grades need to represent the grades and for languages, the speaking endorsement level, a holistic objective judgment on a student's performance. So it is about applying a holistic objective judgment, not about applying past grade boundaries to exams that they have now sat in very different circumstances. The evidence needs to be used consistently wherever possible, which I've already kind of mentioned, that it may not always be possible. And there's so much support available, and it's the subject-specific support guides which are your key to all information. This is a very small image of what a subject-specific support guide looks like. It is a one-stop shop for all your links for your subject, and there's one available for every language. So it provides you with the links to the grading guidance, the exemplification, assessment materials, mapping grids, etc. It is the one document that you really, really, really must have, as well as that Jcq document with all its details. Okay, this gives you the links to everything else. There's also on the Pearson Professional Development Academy website training available. There's recording training, and there's also guidance documents about grading. So please do make sure you access that also if you feel like you need even more support. I'm just checking my notes. So arriving at the grade, it is presented so simply, 5 steps. But of course, I know that it is not ever so simple. But this is what it comes down to. You have to consider what has been taught. If some topics haven't been taught, well, then you can't assess the student using those topics. And that is the point of the mapping grids that we've created, because the mapping grids show you where certain topics are being assessed, and then you know, well, I know they've covered this theme, so I can do these questions, or I know they haven't covered this topic, so I can't do those questions. And that was the whole point of providing that detailed information in the mapping grid. But of course, it's about collecting the evidence, which maybe, I know lots of centres are doing lots of tests. You may have already done mock tests before Christmas. I know a lot of people were expecting there to be another lockdown, and therefore they got mock assessments completed. Evaluating the quality of the evidence, establishing whether the proposed range of evidence is suitable for all students. Again, that point that it doesn't always mean one size fits all. And then assign a grade, which obviously is not as simple as it may sound. But there is a lot of information available to you about assigning a grade. It's not necessarily about looking back, say, at the summer 2019 grade boundaries or the notional grade boundaries for the papers and applying those to exams which are being set now, because that can't be fair, because even if you feel like your students have covered all the content and therefore they could have sat an exam this summer and it would have been fine for them, even if you feel that, the circumstances of these years or the nature of the cohort may have meant that the grade boundaries might have been different. You know, there's a lot of maybe, might be's, could haves. So just be aware of the dangers in looking back at your own centre's grading and looking back at past grade boundaries. They are helpful, definitely, but they shouldn't be what you're basing your decision. Your decision should be based on the grading exemplification that's been provided, and it's been provided in the context of the COVID, the lockdown, and knowing, having general holistic examples of at different levels, and I'll go into those details in the next slide. So, the grade descriptors has been created for all subjects, and they describe mid-grade performance. So I think that's quite an important point to make. So for A-level, there are grade descriptors for grades A, C, and E, and the characteristics of performance at the grade A and grade B borderline are included. And not just grade descriptors, there's kind of exemplification as well. I'll ignore AS because obviously we don't have AS subjects anymore. GCSE, again, grade descriptors have been created at 8, 6, 5, 4, and 2. So that's a wealth of information. And the off-qual descriptors, which were at for 8, 5, and 2, were used as a starting point, but then the characteristics of performance were then kind of developed from that. And there's a grade 4 and grade 3 borderline included. Okay, so each awarding organisation has created grading exemplification. And these were made available on April the 19th. So if you haven't noticed them, seen them, please do access those, because they have past responses using historical examination scripts, and they illustrate the mid-grade performance, and they also no, that's something else. I'll leave that one. So the exemplification, it gives examples of standards that you use to make the grade judgment. So this is what I'm saying, it's a holistic standard, not using the old grade boundaries or pre-existing grade boundaries. Okay. Now, I will give a pause in a moment to allow my colleagues in the background to come in, but just to kind of re-emphasise this point about the use of data. You obviously, I mean, all centres have data tracking systems, and it's provided target grades and your predicted grades. But the policy direction is that the final grade is derived solely based on performances produced by students. A grade derived based on predicted trajectory or target grade is not permitted. So it's not what you think they would have got, which was the case last summer for tags, but it's a case of what they will get now. I don't know if I've got the tags and the CAGs the right way around. I'm really sorry. Katie, can you remind me which one is now? Okay, I'll just move on. So this data can be, if it's used appropriately, it obviously will help you think about what kind of grades your centre may have been expecting for the cohorts. But it should be something that's used after you've decided, after you've used your professional judgment to decide the level of attainment, not to begin the decision. Thanks, Pauline. I had a total memory blank just then, so which way round? Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to just see if there's any questions that have come from coming in the Q&A from Katie or Sharon that you want to just summarise. I'll give a moment for them to just come off mic if needed.
Oh, hello. Yes, lots of questions about submitting grades, which you've answered. They will go on the portal, which is available from the 26th of May. And I'm just answering a question about if there's a limit on the quantity of evidence that needs to be given, or a minimum requirement. And I don't think there's no limit set, and there's no minimum requirement set either. It just has to be enough for you to be sure, as sure as you can be of the grade that you're giving them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what fits with your centre's quality assurance process. Yeah. So it's whatever your centre has stated they are expecting to be the evidence provided. That's what needs to then be used consistently.
And sorry, yes, I was trying to come off mic and answer your question about CAGs and tags, but I couldn't work out how to turn my camera or my microphone on. So sorry about that. Yes, there's not a minimum amount of evidence. That's correct. When you're looking at what your evidence is, it has to align with your centre policy, and you're also making that judgment based upon the conditions, for example, under which that evidence was collected. So, for example, if you've had 30 pieces of homework versus one mock that you sat under controlled conditions in an exam centre, it's not that the one mock is worth less than the 30 pieces of homework. It's not the volume of it that makes the difference. The one mock that everyone has sat and that you took that under controlled conditions, you're confident it was the student's own work. The fact that there's only one of them in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. So it was just, there was a couple of questions about the grade submission. To confirm it's a window, so you don't have to put your grades in like twice, once at the beginning, once at the end, or anything like that. You're just putting them in at some point during that window. And questions about the quality assurance policy. The stage 3 of the quality assurance, when you have to submit a sample and asking who you will be submitting that sample to. So just to confirm that all of the awarding organisations are sharing out the external quality assurance of centres between ourselves. So you won't necessarily be sending your sample to the awarding organisation that you use in any particular subject, because what they're actually doing is they're checking that the evidence that you're submitting aligns with your centre policy. So it was just to answer that question as well.
Yeah, and there'll be a little bit more detail about that quality assurance process just a bit later, just because it only arrived last week, the new information. So I do cover that a bit later. I can see...
Just one important point to make on the amount of evidence. Mm-hmm. The other important point to make is it's expected that teachers are expected to have taught enough and to form a grade to ensure that they have learned enough to progress to the next level. So therefore, if they're doing Gcse, that they've gained enough teaching and you've assessed them on enough teaching to ensure that they could carry on to A level, or from A level it would be on to university.
Yeah, there's various... Oh, sorry, Eva. I was going to say there's various info that says, obviously you can only assess them on what they've been taught, but ideally, in terms of your bucket of evidence, you're looking for evidence across the spread of the assessment objectives, for example, or you're looking for evidence across the spread of the skills that the course is looking for the learners to get. And that's exactly what I was going to
refer to. That's kind of there was a comment in a group chat about surely there needs to be at least one in each of writing, listening, and reading, and that kind of. But no one has stipulated anything or any minimum, but it's about being able to state that the student has accessed all the assessment objectives. Of course, for languages, they are split in that way by the skills. But to say how they will be assessed, or that they will have to be the same, that isn't stipulated either. But the evidence has to be exactly the same for each of them. It's about making sure students had a chance to present what they are capable of doing. Okay, yeah. I'm going to go on.
I was going to say, ultimately, your head of centre is authenticating that the evidence that you have selected for that learner to justify the grade that you've given to that learner is robust and in good faith represents a meaningful way of arriving at that grade. So one might think that one piece of homework on one skill, probably the head of centre wouldn't want to put their name to that and say, yes, that means they definitely would have got an 8. It's about having the flexibility to find that balance that says, based on what they've done and what they've covered, this evidence base gives us the confidence that we can award this grade. And in so doing, if anyone was to ask us a question about it, we could confidently show where that decision had come from. So it's really not about a number per se, it's about authenticating and putting your putting your confidence behind what it is that you're doing. I'm going to try and work out how to turn my mic back off again now.
Okay, I'll move on through these next slides. So the additional assessment materials, and I know that with the word additional, there was expectation that there was going to be some new questions, and that was not the case, but it was presenting the assessment materials in a new way. So, for example, all the writing tasks on all papers that have ever been made available, SAMS 2018, 2019, for example, were all gathered together in one document with the mark schemes, so that it was easier to access them. The mapping grid was an additional assessment material to allow you to work out which topics, themes you could use. So this is the type of additional assessment material that you've had access to. I know that there's a number of languages in our suite where 2020 would have been the first assessment, and obviously that didn't happen, so they didn't have that kind of material behind them, and where that's the case, I think Gujarati, Persian, Portuguese and Turkish, we asked the previous exam board OCR to provide legacy materials for you to use, and that's what's been made available there. So where it says 3 series worth of examination material as a minimum that we had to provide it, that was made possible in different ways. So you've got plenty of materials available to you, the past examiner reports, marked examples of student work from past papers, and links to other information. Now, in terms of feasible adjustments, these should be processed as per normal by your SENCO, so that should follow the same process that it always has done. And if there are issues with modifying assessment materials, please do get in touch, because we want to ensure that everyone can access all the materials, teachers and students alike. So please don't not be able to access material, just get in touch, and the subject advisor or other individuals. The appeals, there's a lot of information, it's very small. So basically, the ability to appeal is still allowed. I mean, the aim is to ensure that on results day, students are issued with fair and consistent grades that have been objectively reached. If for any reason the student doesn't feel that's the case, they can appeal their grade, but they should appeal first to the centre. And then your centres can check whether there's been an administrative or procedural error, whether the quality assurance process hasn't been followed, for example. And if you find that there was an error, then you let us know, explain the rationale, and then we can make a change. If you find that there's no error and that is the grade that you wanted to give the student, then the student can ask for you to submit their appeal to the exam board. And then we will ask you to submit the evidence on which the judgment was made, and so we can consider whether a grade reflected the appropriate judgment. I'm just going to sneeze. No. And if the exam board judges that the centre did not apply the correct judgment, then they may change the grade. Okay, but there is a long process, but the student should go to you first. The student you can share with the student, and I'm going to be very clear about this, the evidence being used as part of your grade determination. You're not meant to share with them the grade. Okay, so you can share the evidence being used, but you don't share the grade that they're being issued. They don't find that out until the results day in August. Okay. So there's lots of information. Hopefully you've have signed up for the email updates. You can also sign up to find out about training. Well, and I already mentioned how there's lots of videos available to talk you through kind of grading decisions, the appeals, the quality assurance, and unconscious bias also. So that's something to make sure you do access if you feel it's necessary. All the full subject support guides can be found at the Summer 2021 support page. As I mentioned, all these links are going to be on a PDF that's made available in your downloads. helpful information on the Ofqual website, and as I said, make sure you sign up. There is also the mock service. Now, I've got lots of notes here just to make sure that I'm very clear. The deadline has passed for the Year 11, Year 13 summer term mocks. If you are someone who is using the mock service, right now is when your students can be doing their exams, and the final date to return the exams for marking, if you want to use them towards your tags, is the 21st of May. Okay. Now, if you wanted to use a mock service for your Year 10 and Year 12, just kind of thinking ahead, if that's something you want to do, the deadline for making entries for the mock service is May the 10th. Okay, so that's just to kind of draw your attention to this service that's available for you. But of course, you know, in terms of what's provided to you, it is a marked piece of work. It's not a grade decision. So just to make that clear. Okay, there's lots of information and links if you want to know more, have more information about the mock service that we've created at Pearson. And of course, I'm sure just as we're getting lots of questions from you, I'm sure you're getting lots of questions from parents and carers, and we have, again, lots of resources available to them with timelines, feedback forms, infographics, and they can sign up for the Parents and Carers newsletter. So please do kind of advertise that through your various email portals that you enters to your parents if they want to have more information and understand the process further. Okay, so are there any more questions that have come through that you just want to come back on mic to deal with before I move on to the MFL specific? Just interrupt if it's the case. I'm just going to move on to this very quick bit about QA sampling, quality assurance sampling, and this is where new information came out after the main slides had been created, so on the 27th of April. So this is the information from Ofqual that every centre will be asked to provide evidence of student work. Examples will request evidence for at least one A-level subject and 2 GCSE subjects, one of which is likely to be either English or maths. So all centres will be asked to provide the evidence used to determine the grades for at least 5 students for each of these subjects. Examples will let centres know which subjects and students have been selected in the week beginning the 21st of June, so obviously after the mark submission deadline. And then the evidence will need to be returned to examples within 48 hours of the request. So this is a further quality assurance process to kind of make sure that evidence is being considered. Okay, so that was new information. The thing that you need to remember is to retain your evidence, and that's what's going to be a necessary thing, and retain it until the appeals have been completed and until everything is cleared and September comes back, a new school year. But you will need to retain the evidence that you're using for your grade decisions. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the languages specific section. So I'll repeat again. There is a really superb overview document, one-stop shop for all your information with all the links to everything that you need. If you haven't seen it, you need to just go to your languages page on our website. You'll see in the top tabs, there's one called Summer 2021 Support. You click on that and the document is literally sitting on that page in the corner, and you can just click on that document and then you've got all your links. I've mentioned the mapping grid already, important for identifying topics that have been targeted by the questions. So you can design bespoke papers if you want to, or you can just pull out the questions which are relevant to your students for each of the skills. There are the resource sets that we created, organised by skill, and in those resource sets you have all the questions, examiner reports and mark schemes gathered together per tier, So it's a superb kind of resource that you could then access exactly what you need and find elements. Alison, I will give you a link in a moment. I've actually got it on my page, but I don't want to lose my thread here. So in a moment, I'll show you a link. And as I said, all the links will be on a document that's going to be made available. So every single link that's mentioned on this size set, anywhere where there's a hyperlink, it's going to be on a document that you'll be able to access. There's a little asterisk here because, of course, some of this material has been made available to students. That's only the questions and the mapping grids, not the mark schemes, not the examiner reports. So just to make it clear what's padlocked and what's not padlocked. Thanks, Chloe. So we have grade descriptors, and the more importantly, with those grade descriptors, the exemplification. So again, 1 document per skill, and it provides them at these grades outlined here. You have the grade descriptor, a script example, and examiner commentary per grade. Okay, it's a really superb piece of information. And that is what you should be using for making your decisions or for discussing in your department when you're looking at your grading. Maybe if you have a couple of sets studying the same language, for example, that is the grading, the level that you should be using for your holistic decisions. Okay, are there any questions about those elements? Anything coming through on the Q&A, Katie or Sharon?
Right, there's a question that has come up, and I'm not really sure what he means. There's people asking about to speak about assessment objectives and how to fill them in the evidence basket. So I'm not really sure what the question means, unless it means if it means how do you. With the Gcse, there are 4 assessment objectives: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Your listening, reading, and writing each have a different assessment objective. AO1 is listening, AO3 is reading, AO4 is writing. And these 3 skills, these 3 assessment objectives, are the ones where you need to supply evidence against. Not AO2 speaking, because that's being assessed separately by the endorsement. So how to fill them in the evidence basket, if you mean how do we show that you've got evidence of all of those, then you will need to gather some evidence of each one. It doesn't have to be equal across all of them. You can have more reading than you've got listening, for example, but the advice is to get evidence for across the assessment objectives. I'm not sure if that's what you mean. If not, could you put something in the question? Does anyone else think
some people I think have been asking if it has to be equal. Maybe it's about that. So you know, the answer is no. So the question is something like, if the normal distribution of the weightings of the AOs is 25, 25, 25, does my evidence pot have to be 25, 25, 25? And the answer is no, it doesn't, because you're not trying to get a mark for your students that you're submitting to us. You're trying to get evidence together from all of the evidence that you could select to determine the grade. So obviously, normally we determine that grade by the marks that they get in their exams, which have certain weightings and so forth. Those are all added up, and that becomes their grade at the end based on the grade boundary allocation. You're not doing any of that because those things don't exist. So you don't have to balance your AOs 25, 25, 25 or 30, whatever it is for A-level, I can't remember.
3 recurring.
Yeah. So you don't have to do that. So if you have, for example, 2 listening mocks, 1 reading mock, and 1 piece of writing that they did under supervised conditions in the classroom, which isn't a mock, and that's going to be the basis of your evidence pot, then doesn't matter that there's more reading than there is writing. that's fine. So I've seen that question coming up quite a few times. Maybe that's what people were asking. People are asking about how they're going to determine what the grade boundaries are. You're not going to do that. There are grade boundaries for past papers, and I don't think people are saying don't use them. It's not like a hard no. Don't look at the 2018 or 2019 grade boundaries, but the grade descriptors that have been provided and the grade exemplification that has been provided is to show what that grade looks like in genuine candidate work. So you can put your candidate's piece of work against that exemplification and say, does that look like it's working to the same standard? Because other questions, can you modify past papers and take out content that your learner hasn't learned? Yes, you can. You can take stuff out. That's fine. That obviously means that if you were hoping to look at the grade boundaries to give you a ballpark sense that those grade boundaries are going to be different, because that question that you've removed was worth something. Also, the distribution of how the candidates performed on that particular question might have been different. So yes, you can modify mock papers. I think that's the main ones around mocks and grading and those kind of things. Some people have asked why there isn't grade exemplification or grade descriptors for the grades other than the ones which are there. It was a Jcq-led position, so all the awarding organisations were directed to provide those grade exemplification materials at those given grade points. So that is why it's those ones.
Thank you. I can see there's a few more comments in the group chat also. And I think you've dealt with, a question about, they're better in certain skills. Can we weigh the better skill more? You're not weighing anything more. It's about the holistic judgment. When you look at the exemplification, we look at how your student sits against the grading exemplification that we've provided, where does the evidence point towards? Where could you definitely say that's kind of the majority of evidence is showing this grade? I'm not sure about the comment about assessment papers being website locked. Perhaps you might want to put that question to the Q&A if you want more detailed. And yes, the exemplification is used in past papers, past materials, but as Katie was saying, qualifications, grading is provided at qualification level. Notional paper grades are just that, they're notional. They're not hard and fast information about how marks equate to grades. It's a very kind of big process, the awarding process, and it's not one that we're using this year. Okay, so that's why the exemplification has been provided, so that you don't need to look at kind of past grade boundaries unless you really want to, you're interested in seeing, but that you can see, okay, my student is similar to that student who's being stated as would be a grade 8 type of work, and that should kind of give you more confidence. Okay, I'm going to move on, so I'm going to kind of leave either Sharon or Casey perhaps to look at the other comments in the group chat, or we can come back to it later if there's more time. But I just want to make sure I get to the end of the slides before we go back over these questions. Okay, right. So, of course, for languages, we have the extra element of speaking, where for GCSE it was pulled out and then they retained the fact that it had been pulled out from the final grade, whereas for A-level it was kept in. So it's just to kind of highlight the difference between these two elements. With GCSE speaking endorsement, there's no requirement for centres to supply evidence of speaking. So for all I'm talking about evidence, and you must keep your evidence, for speaking, there's no requirement for you to supply the evidence of speaking to us. The endorsement and speaking skills do not form part of the awarding organisation's quality assurance process or appeal activities. So if you were asked to provide the evidence for 5 students that did your GCSE French, if it happened to be that that's what was chosen, it would be for the bit that you have provided a grade for, not the speaking endorsement level. Okay. The level only is relate to content you've been able to cover with your students. So if you haven't been able to cover all topics, themes, that's not an issue. And the teacher's decision to keep records is the teacher's decision to keep records in order to explain to students how they arrived at judgments. Okay, so if you want to explain kind of the information that you're using to arrive at your judgment, that's the reason to keep it, not because we're going to be asking you for it. Okay. We provided a lot of training in autumn about speaking endorsements, and there's a set criteria for that. There's additional guidance for a range of language per language. We have FAQs, and we've got at a glance assessment sheets. So for those of you who are continuing to do speaking activities in your lessons, that material is all available, and that QR code would take you to that information. On the other hand, A-level speaking, which unlike the GCSE, the speaking skills should contribute towards the overall teacher assessed grade for 2016 and 2017 languages. So that's your French, German, Spanish, Chinese, Italian, Russian. The other languages do not have speaking as an element of the A-level. So this is where we kind of highlight that it's about making sure you can evidence that the assessment objective coverage, but that's not to say that they have to have done a full speaking exam. You make your own decision about how you're going to approach the assessment of speaking skills, whether it's classroom speaking activities, past exam content for task 1 or the speaking cards that are available, whether you actually have your student do their IRP presentation and have the discussion either formally or informally, or completion of a full paper-free assessment if you want them still to experience that. That is entirely up to you, but the consideration of speaking skill should be part of your decision about the A-level grade, because obviously there's not a separate endorsement for the A-level speaking. Okay, and just to mention about private candidates, because of course for languages we do have a lot of private candidates who sit what are often non-taught or taught in community school languages, heritage languages, and these languages were disproportionately affected in summer 2020 because of the very last minute decision about CAGs. Centres weren't able to support the private candidates in the way they might normally and allow them to make entries because they couldn't verify the grades, kind of the results that they would be submitting. So that meant a lot of those summer 2020 heritage candidates were going to wait for summer 2021 because often they might enter early, and so another year wasn't going to be a problem. We're now at summer 2021. Another year will be a problem because this is when they need to get their grades. And the DfE were aware of this, and they made sure that there was a support grant available to a centre of £200 per candidate per entry. The deadline for private candidate entries has now passed. I'm sure there's always late entries. But that deadline has passed. But you may be a centre who has accepted private candidates, and now you obviously have to deal with having a grade submitted for that candidate. So if you need support, and I've seen lots of people doing this on Facebook where they say, "Oh, is there anyone who wouldn't mind reading this Japanese response or giving me their opinion about this Turkish response?" That is one way of doing it. The NRCSE, the National Resource Centre for Supplementary Education, are a fantastic source of information and could either direct you to people who might be able to help you with those assessments. Other sources are language networks from the Association for Language Learning, the UK Mandarin Excellence Programme for any Chinese learners, Japan Foundation, etc. And at Pearson also, if you really hit the wall with not being able to find anyone who can provide an assessment or provide information on how the student's work could be what grade evidence is, then please get in contact with Alistair Drury and he will be able to help you find a suitable language expert. Okay. So just to be clear, when it comes to private candidates and their sources of evidence, if they are from an educational organisation, there are plenty of community, long-standing community schools which have relationships with centres, or long-standing relationships with centres who have always entered them as private candidates. You have no concerns about the authenticity and it meets your internal QA processes, so they have done the exams that you would have done for your students, or the expectation what you would have done, then you can take the grade that they provide to you and submit that. If it's a private tutor, you should and this is from Jcq, you must validate it by setting at least one other assessment. And if, for example, it's a family member who's providing the evidence, that would be a conflict of interest and you cannot accept that. So you would want to conduct your own assessments or ensure that assessments had been conducted in a manner that could then kind of be reliable for providing a grade. So there's lots of information from Jcq about this if you happen to be a centre who is in that situation. And when it comes to speaking endorsement, again, we dealt with all of this back in autumn when we were looking at the speaking endorsement and ensured that there was a process in place to allow that private candidates could also get their speaking endorsement. This is where that centre declaration form would have to be entered by a centre saying that kind of we are accepting students in these languages also. And then there's an assessor declaration form. So whoever it is who's provided a grade to you, or sorry, the speaking endorsement level to you, they have to fill in an assessor declaration form that states that they have read the criteria and understand how to apply the criteria. And that's all available on the website, and that QR code will take you there. Now, that is the last of my slides. I'm going to allow just a little bit of time at the end just to talk about another element that we might want to consider for language teachers, but I want to make sure that we've gone back over any new questions, or these questions should come through on the group chat. So Katie, Sharon, is there anything that you want to bring up whilst I scroll back up through the group chat and see what we need to respond to?
Yeah, so quite a lot of questions about, I guess, what I would call a spiky profile. So if we have a learner who's really good on one skill, but less good on another skill, how does the teacher arrive at the teacher assessed grade in that case? Quite a lot of people are asking that question. I don't know if you've had any thoughts on that, or that's come through, any advice that anyone's been given with regard to that before. And then also some more questions about, do you have to, I think to clarify, people asking, you don't have to provide a mark for every paper, you don't have to provide a grade for each skill, you're providing one grade overall for your candidate for either GCSE or for A-level. So there's been questions coming through, how do I do the listening grade, how do I do the reading grade? You don't. There is in fact no such thing as a listening grade or a reading grade or a speaking grade. Even in a normal series, there's just the French grade or a Turkish grade. So you're not trying to pick a grade for each skill. But when a candidate has a spiky profile, so they're much better at one thing than the other, that is challenging, but you're trying to look at their performance overall. So you're trying to make a holistic judgment of that candidate's profile overall. Now, maybe this is just my thought here, so please feel free to leap in if I'm sounding insane, Eva, but I would have thought that thinking about candidates who are similar to that candidate that you had in the past, and what their kind of, what the profile of that candidate is. So where people have got, skills in one area more than another, see if you can compare that to any kind of candidate performance that you've had in the past, might be one way of looking at that. But you would essentially be doing I would say, best fit approach.
Yes, I was just about to say that. If you look at the grade descriptors and you look at the grade exemplars, they are very good, particularly the grade exemplars. So within the grade descriptor, it does have it does have a description of each of the skills that you're assessing. And I know that it's more difficult to assess a grade for listening and reading because they're points based rather than levels based. However, the exemplars that have been given does take a whole paper, and it does say, it describes a student who gets a grade, grade 8, 6, whatever, and it does help a lot to actually put them into, your initial band, your initial grade, and then it is a question of putting them in that initial grade and then thinking, are they just slightly above this or are they slightly below that? And it is very, very judgmental. It is, but you will have the student evidence to base it on. So you can do a holistic assessment of all of their skills together. But as Katie says, it's not about, grade this in listening, grade that in reading. It is an holistic view. But I think the materials are quite helpful there.
Thank you, Shetma. They're really helpful. I know people are asking where to find the materials. I just put a link in. It happened to be to GCSE Spanish, but it's the same, whatever language. And if you find the Summer 2021 assessment materials, that is where all the documents, kind of, for example, the mapping grids, grade exemplification, etc., are. So you just have to go to your language, teaching and learning materials, and find the Summer 2021 assessment materials filter. There's lots of questions. There's something about no mixed tiering. Well, no, because you would have entered your student for a tier and made that decision. So you should use evidence from that tier to make the decision. So you can't start mixing the tiering. For the decision, it's a strange situation, obviously, for all of this. There was something else, something about the A-level speaking. Does it need to be recorded? Do we need to provide evidence for it? Well, if A-level is something that quality assurance might ask for, A-level, it might ask for you to provide the evidence on which you base your decision, then it sounds like that means you should have evidence of the speaking level. Your internal quality assurance procedure would have decided what that evidence will be. Will that be the teacher's records of the students, of the assessment of that student, or will that have to be the actual recording? No one is asking for anyone to submit recordings right now, but I will go back to the assessment team and find out kind of more details about that. And any of these questions which we haven't been able to answer, I will make sure we go back and get the information and update you. As I said, I just wanted to draw attention to just one thing, just because it relates to kind of obviously language teachers, and just to remind you that there is the consultation on Gcse French, German, and Spanish that is live and closes on the 19th of May. So the slides from last week's event where I walked through the consultation, how the subject contents varies from the current to the proposed, is available on the website on the past training content. So I just wanted to kind of make sure I reminded anyone who wants to reply to do so. But yes, any questions that we haven't been able to answer, we will find out the information and get back to you.
I just wanted to say,
right.
I popped in the group chat. It's probably disappeared now, right up there. But if people scroll back up, I popped in there the homepage for the 2021 support. If you go onto that 2021 link and go all the way down to the bottom, there are drop-down menus for GCSE A-level. Click on one of those, and then you've got your subjects under that. So that will take you straight to where all of that material is. And I also wanted to add that somebody asked me in one of the questions if they had a student who was entered for a particular tier, but they had some evidence that they're taken from the other tier. Was that okay? And I said, well, you'll be explaining in your centre policy what your evidence base is for making that decision, and they have to get a grade that was attributable to the tier of entry that they were made an entry for. But if, for example, you gave them some crossover questions, or you gave them a higher tier writing paper and a foundation tier reading paper, that's fine, you can do that, but you're giving them a grade that's available on their tier of entry. So if you entered them for higher tier, you're not giving them a grade 2, weirdly, because that's the tier of entry that they were entered for. I just wanted to clarify that, just in case I confused anyone.
Thanks, Katie. And thank you, Sharon. And thanks, everyone, for coming along and asking lots of questions. And I hope that you found this helpful. Again, if you've got any other questions, please contact our subject advisor, Alistair Drury, or use the various kind of facilities on the website to help with the summer 2021 material. Okay, I hope you